Interesting times for the RTS community, everybody. We just witnessed the announcement of Stormgate, the big RTS by FrostGiant, the first game from FrostGiant. It's supposed to save the RTS genre, and we're all excited about what we just witnessed. And for that, we want to learn more. We want to talk about the game. We want to talk about FrostGiant, and who better than Kevin Dong, aka Monk, formerly Team Liquid, formerly Blizzard, now FrostGiant, joining us here. Kevin, how was the first impression and what are the first reactions to the big reveal we just witnessed?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. Neo, I'm excited. Neo, you guys are excited. Everyone is excited about the big FrostGiant reveal, hopefully. And I can't wait to share with both you and the rest of the Warcraft 3 community about what our game is really about.
Exactly. First of all, we cover you a little bit. What are you doing at FrostGiant? What's a typical day for you? What are you responsible for?
Yeah, so I'm a lead designer here at FrostGiant, focusing primarily on gameplay. So what I like a lot about my job is every day is a little bit different. And for example, some days I'll be designing units, other days I'll be designing an economy, other days I'll be interfacing with either the engineers or the artists about the look and the feel of our game. But yeah, it's basically everything, everywhere all at once. If you've seen that movie, one of my favorites.
pretty
I've
pretty
heard it's
interesting.
life changing. I haven't seen it
It
yet,
is,
but
it
that's
is.
literally what I've heard. It's an incredible movie. But yeah, I'll have to watch it. We'll talk about it next week.
So as a lead designer, you're still doing all the stuff yourself and not just delegated to other people?
Well, we have an incredibly talented team here at FrostGiant, many of which came from StarCraft 2 and from Warcraft 3. For instance, our game director was the lead campaign designer of Warcraft 3, and the rest of our team, we have Ryan Shooter, who made GameHeart, who created who is the inspiration for I know many of the overlays from Back to Warcraft. He's kind of one of the first people to really do esports overlays and observing and built right into the engine. Just a lot of talent people over from StarCraft and a lot of like built over knowledge and experience about RTS design on our team, which I'm really proud of.
Yeah, speaking of RTS, a lot of people in the gaming community say that it's a dead genre. And now you're here, you're starting a new company, you're still working on RTS. Are you guys mad?
Oh, we couldn't be happier. I think RTS is in a prime position to come back into the limelight. Us as a team, we of course love Warcraft 3, we love StarCraft 2, and we can't wait to show the next iteration and the next evolution of what we believe RTS can be.
Why do
Yeah,
you think it is that RTS is sort of not as popular as it once was? Because it was super popular 20 years ago, and it sort of maybe died off a little bit. It's certainly not as popular as MOBAs or FPS, for instance. Why do you think that is in this day and age? Is it like attention span, or is it just different games come around? What's your opinion on that?
I think one of the biggest things it's to frame it a little differently. I don't think necessarily that RTS is less popular, and it's more that other games have become more popular.
Right.
Gaming as a whole has evolved so much over the last 10, 20 years, such that it's like maybe a factor of 10 bigger than what it was before, whereas the RTS scene has remained relatively constant in player base. However, here at FrostGiant, we're trying to kind of take the lessons learned from the last 10, 20 years of gaming. You know, no one has really made like a really big super RTS ever since StarCraft 2 came out. Can you believe it? 12 years ago. And we're going to try to take some of the lessons learned in the last 10, 12 years in order to make that evolution. And one of the biggest parts about that is that Stormgate is going to be what we believe one of the first social RTSs.
what's that supposed to mean? What is a social RTS?
Yeah, so back on StarCraft 2, we got a lot of feedback that even though it was technically a multiplayer game, a PvP game, as most people think of it, it can feel very solitary. You
Hmm.
kind of just hang out by yourself. In the very beginning, the chat system wasn't as robust, so you kind of felt like you were playing by yourself. The main way you play it is in a 1v1 PvP competitive mode, or in a campaign setting where you play against the AI. In the last like 10, 12 years, social gaming has become such a big thing. You see it with examples like Among Us, with Fall Guys, with like CS:GO, like League of Legends, all these MOBAs. All these games are great social experiences that you can bring your friends into, and that's a lot of what we're trying to capture. So for every game mode that we have, and we're built on 4 pillars: competitive, cooperative, campaign, and user generated content. Each of these 4 pillars, with each of these 4 pillars, one of our main design philosophies is trying to bring some of that social element to them.
Yeah, I mean, we're in the Warcraft world. We have a little bit of 4-on-4 hype going on at the moment. It's pretty much the best example that it can work, right? It's not ultra competitive in 4-on-4, except the ladder, of course, but there are no tournaments. Is that something you took inspiration from?
Yeah, totally. I think how Warcraft 3 4v4 has developed in the past year even has truly been inspirational for us at the team. Just the fact that number one, games are trending in that direction. People don't necessarily want to play hardcore 1v1 anymore. Even the pros from both the West and China have really jumped on the 4v4 train. Another interesting aspect is the idea that um, there's a lot of teamwork involved in these 4v4 scenarios, and we've really seen the meta evolve. I think back in the day, like everyone kind of did whatever they wanted, they did their own thing. Whereas these days, you have like these roles that each race has. Like the humans, oh, you're responsible for like the knights, or the anti-air, or the spellbreakers, or the night elf. You're responsible for the tank units. And I think that's really interesting, and lessons that we learned. And one of the things that we're doing, especially in the FrostGiant RTS Stormgate, is that we've really come to see that we need to design a team mode from the ground up. We're going to have 1v1 competitive, which is going to appeal to core RTS fans of very hardcore StarCraft 2 and Warcraft 3. But at the same time, I think we're going to be the first RTS to kind of make a 3v3 mode that is completely divorced, or rather divorced, from the rule set of 1v1. So in our team battle mode, we're not necessarily going to have the same win condition, and we're going to design everything from the ground up such that it makes sense for a team mode. Traditionally in RTS, you see kind of team modes as being an afterthought. You kind of just take the 1v1 mode and you copy and paste the rules from there. But we're going to try to build it from the ground up.
Yeah, because that's always been an issue is the balance. People are talking about, especially with all the balance talk we've had in the last month in Warcraft, is like, oh, but if you do that for 1v1, you're going to screw up the 4v4. So I really like to hear that you're actually taking it separate, same mechanics, same idea, same game, same units in a way, but different. Not afraid to change the rule set around it. I think that's very, very important, knowing about how people have been talking about 4v4 recently.
Mm-hmm.
What would be an example of a new win condition? Something like capture the flag, or what do you think about?
Yeah, so there's been a lot of win conditions traditionally in RTS. So the big one that we see in Warcraft 3 and Starcraft 2, all the Blizzard RTSs really, I would call annihilation, where you try to eliminate the enemy opponent. And I think that runs into a bunch of problems. It has a bunch of benefits, first of all. It allows the game to be very open-ended, so it's kind of an open sandbox as to how you play. You can turtle, you can expand, you can mast air, you can do whatever you want, basically. However, one of the downsides we've seen is, number one, the real win condition with RTS is kind of like you demoralize your opponents into giving up.
That's
And
so true.
the second is that in a team game you can potentially be eliminated, and when we look into other team genres such as MOBA, such as FPS, that's not really a constant. When you are killed, quote unquote, you somewhat instantly, or after a brief period, revive. So one of the things that we're looking to is kind of removing the idea of annihilation, and even though we give up the more open-ended aspect of it, we allow for players to kind of can persist in the battle so that you don't get eliminated from the fight. So as to your original question, what are some alternate conditions? We're taking a look at a lot of alternate win conditions that have existed in other RTSs. So for example, in Supreme Commander or in many MOBAs, for instance, there's the idea of assassination, where you kill a singular hero or you kill a singular building, such as a nexus, in order to win. We're also looking at other win conditions, for example, those that come from relic games, Company of Heroes and Dawn of War, where it's kind of a capture the flag mechanic. We don't have anything specific to announce with regarding our win condition, but those are just some of the areas we're drawing inspiration from.
Sounds pretty exciting for the team gamers, I guess. But let's roll it back a little bit. You just revealed Stormgate, and I think the biggest thing we can take away from it is, of course, the name. It's out there now. And the setting. You mentioned quite a few times already that the main inspiration was, of course, the Blizzard RTS, Starcraft, and Warcraft. The setting feels to me like a little bit of both. It's like sci-fi, post-apocalyptic, but also some fantasy elements. Is that correct?
Yeah, I would say that's a fairly accurate description. We wanted to our goals with the setting are to make it distinct from Blizzard RTS styles and settings. However, we want everything to be in a foundation where people can kind of relate to. People have a jumping off point, such that when you come into our game, you're not immediately lost at the endless amount of like the lore or the like to get a jumping off point. So yeah, our setting, we're really excited about our setting. A Stormgate is a portal in which these demons are coming in to invade Earth. And yes, even though it's going to be a post-apocalyptic setting, I think one thing I want to emphasize is that unlike a lot of post-apocalyptic settings, it's not super morbid. You know, there wasn't a quote-unquote apocalypse at one point, but people are recovering from it. And you know, just when the humans are recovering, they get hit again with another Stormgate. Something happens, and you'll find out more about it in our campaigns.
Cool.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
Sorry, that sounds to me like you have a lot of freedom with that setting as well, because you can use the sci-fi elements. You can also play around with magic a little bit. Was that part of the decision as well? The freedom that the setting gives you?
Oh yeah, totally. Since we on our team, we're big fans of Warcraft, we're big fans of Starcraft, we're big fans of Diablo, which shares some similarities here. We like the idea, honestly, like as a nerd, you get to play with all these like little toys in our game.
Carson?
Yeah, was there many other like ideas? Because me and Neo on the last podcast, we were sort of just brainstorming in preparation for the announcement, and we were trying to think of different settings. And I think I came up with like one that wasn't either StarCraft or Warcraft. I thought of like Cyberpunk. I think Neo had a couple, but because it seems like between StarCraft and Warcraft, they've covered so many different themes and stuff. Were there many others that you guys were throwing around that were unique before you came upon this idea, or have we pretty much covered all of them in the RTS genre so far?
Oh, I think there's an endless number of uh, of settings you could explore. I know
Mm.
like in our initially we had something like we just like spitballed around 10 that were in serious consideration, and then
Mhm.
we narrowed it down to 3. And I think what we have right now is kind of a combination of maybe around 2 of them. It's
Right.
been so long that we've talked about setting on our team that I actually cannot recall what other settings were up for debate. But I think just in general, how you approach RTS, I think you can approach it in one of 2 ways. The first is kind of more the Blizzard style, where it's very fantastical and you just kind of can do whatever. And the other end is more rooted in realism. For example, like
Mm.
the Company of Heroes franchise, and somewhat the Red Alert series, but not really. And I actually really enjoy a lot of aspects of Company of Heroes in that it's very realistic, and the game does a really good job of making you feel like you're part of World War II or just any war in general.
Mhm.
I think the unit designs are great. The sound design is awesome, but I think one thing that that approach takes away is that gameplay is not necessarily first. The setting is kind of limits you into what you can do, right? You can't have like these spaceships coming into the World War II setting. You can't well, like air units can't be like too big of a factor that just float around and like hover around everywhere, right? So with our choice and setting, we purposely made it so that we do have the freedom to engage with any types of units, any types of mechanics that we want.
For sure.
Sounds pretty promising indeed. You mentioned gameplay already. This has always been the big strength of the Blizzard RTS. I think it feels very responsive, I guess, and this is probably what you approach as well. What is your main thing that makes a Blizzard RTS, and what is your philosophy in recreating and even improving on that?
Right. So I think like there's a lot of things that really define a Blizzard RTS. You have things like the amount of asymmetry that's in the different factions. Well, starting from after Warcraft 2, obviously. And then you have kind of the economy design with 2 resources per faction, again, starting from post Warcraft 2. But I think the main thing that really defines a Blizzard style RTS or Blizzard RTSs in general is the idea of extreme responsiveness and really smooth pathfinding that I think StarCraft 2 has really set a very high bar on. And I think when a lot of people these days get into an RTS, they see that, oh, I'm comparing it to StarCraft 2, and this doesn't really necessarily feel as smooth as I remember it from SC2, and therefore I'm jumping ship. So one of our core pillars, one of the things that we really are striving towards is the idea that you're going to have crisp responsiveness. You're going to have very smooth pathfinding. I know the analogy that I made in one of the presentations you guys attended, one of the pre-brief summits, is the idea of a crispy piece of fried chicken that when you bite into it, you get an audible crisp, and you get a crunch in your mouth. So it's all these senses being overwhelmed, and you're really like feeling that the RTS is listening to your commands. So not only is it the responsiveness, it's also the feedback. When you click, something happens. There's an audible sound. There's a response from your mouths. And in order to achieve all those things, the crisp pathfinding and the responsiveness, we've built what we call Snowplay, which is a custom built, highly configurable and extremely efficient gameplay simulation that unlocks low bandwidth multiplayer game features. We're building it on top of the Unreal Engine, and it's going to be something custom that no other RTS is going to have. In addition, this system is being led by James Anhalt, who was the chief architect of the pathfinding system in StarCraft 2. So we have a lot of confidence going into the idea that we're going to be as responsive, if not more responsive, and have better pathfinding than what we did with StarCraft 2.
Wow.
Yeah, you mentioned
better. Oh my god.
Better, yeah, that's a big goal indeed. You mentioned the Unreal Engine. We heard Back to Warcraft. We play a 20-year-old game, right? We have no idea what that even means. So can you, for the uneducated old schoolers here, explain what's so great about the Unreal Engine 5?
Yeah, Unreal Engine is just a great base for building just games in general. It is one of the most respected, or possibly the most highly respected engine in the AAA industry. Basically, especially with Unreal 5, we unlock a lot of key features such as Lumen and Nanite, which I probably can't go too in depth into, but it's going to allow for really great graphics, readable graphics. Of course, we don't want to be too many colors and everything.
You can say it, yeah.
I don't know what you guys are talking about, so I'm going to move on. But just to give you the idea of detail, the trailer that you've seen on June 9th was completely made in engine in Unreal 5. So that's kind of the quality that you can expect.
That's pretty incredible. Since we're touching a little bit on Warcraft here, of course, we talked a little bit about the gameplay. I want to know more about the gameplay. Like, how do you envision your average one-on-one Stormgate match?
Right. So with Stormgate, we have a lot of gameplay tenets, but I think one of our top tenets is the idea of territory control. And that's the idea that there's tension between the benefits of controlling territory and also the number of threats it opens up. So there's a push-pull dynamic there. So StarCraft 2 kind of handled that with expansions. When you expand, you gain more resources, and but you also open yourself to more avenues of attack. In Warcraft 3, that's handled by map objectives and such as well, creeps is the main one, and also like mercenary camps, item shops, and health fountains. So we're going to be an RTS that really focuses on that that territory control. In terms of moment-to-moment gameplay, as I mentioned, we're really going to focus on expanding is going to be a big part of it. That kind of high macro opportunity, and the idea that you can kind of multitask over the map is something that we're going to focus on. At the same time, we're taking a lot of inspiration from Warcraft 3 as well. For instance, we're moving closer to the low lethality of Warcraft 3. We think that in StarCraft, the very high lethality in that game creates a lot of punishing moments where you weren't looking for a second and then your entire army died. We want the idea, we like the idea that there's more opportunities to micro and there's more opportunities to not lose your army instantly. In addition, there's a lot of asymmetries in Warcraft 3 that we're looking to, such as the amount of asymmetry in mining. That doesn't really exist in StarCraft 2, and we think that is really interesting. And another thing, creep camps, that's something that we talked about. We think creep camps are interesting in that they provide an mid-map objective that players have to fight over, and there's a cool territorial control there. However, we think one aspect of creep camps that could be improved on is after you take all the creep camps on the map, for instance, right? What often happens in endgame is you just kind of camp in your base and then max out and then fight. The creep camps are interesting in that they provide a temporary mid-map objective, but it's not something that you fight over the course of a game for, and we think there could be improvements there.
Since you mentioned creep camps, oh, sorry, Carson, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think that is a big thing in Warcraft. Like, as good as it is, like, you have a lot of objectives, I think, for the first 10, 12 minutes. But in pro games, because people are so efficient with their creeping, especially in the meta we're in, you end up with a lot of stalemate positions where you both just, again, sit in your bases. So I think the idea of, like, respawning objectives is really, really important, because the most exciting part of the game tends to be, in Warcraft, at least for me, like the 25-minute, the 30-minute, the 40-minute games where you're super late, but to have an extra objective would make those super late game scenarios much more interesting.
Yeah, totally. I don't know like what the general community consensus is, but I've really been enjoying Warcraft over the past few years compared to maybe in the 2010 era, because expansions are more commonplace. You very often take that second expansion. In general, most races can take that second expansion, and it's no longer always going to be a battle of one base versus one base, for instance.
So since you mentioned creep camps, in Warcraft you creep these camps to get experience for your hero and level them up. Is that the same in Stormgate?
Yeah, so I'm going to preface everything in this interview with where everything is still in development and we're still iterating on things. But right now, we definitely are experimenting with heroes across all our game modes. And heroes in our game will be more similar to that of I would say like a Mogul Khan, where they don't level up, but they're still a key unit in battle. Two of the things that when we analyzed heroes in Warcraft 3 and in Starcraft 2, we came to the conclusion that heroes provide a lot of benefits to RTS gameplay, but the two we really wanted to avoid, or the two negatives we wanted to avoid, were the threat of over centralization and the threat of snowballing. So one aspect of Warcraft 3 is that whenever you lose a unit to the enemy, it is tracked permanently on your enemy's hero, on the opponent's hero. And that creates kind of a snowball mechanic where if your heroes are super high level, it can kind of feel like sometimes it's impossible to come back. There are anti-snowball mechanics built into that. For example, hero killing is kind of a comeback mechanic, the antithesis of snowballing, in that if you kill your enemy's hero, it takes a longer time to revive them, and it's much more costly to revive them if they are a higher level. However, we still feel that overall it is a net snowball. The other thing is the threat of over centralization. We like the idea of that you can kind of separate your army and split your army across multiple parts of the map. And in Warcraft 3, one of the aspects is that heroes force players to kind of group up in kind of a death ball way. I wouldn't necessarily blame that primarily all on heroes, but there's some aspects of Warcraft 3 that kind of encourage that. For example, there's no type of Zergling unit that can do a lot of harassment damage across the map, and there's no such thing as There's no such thing as like a dark swarm that protects these Zergling units. There's no such thing as marine drops that can do catastrophic damage in very small groups. So part of it is going to be the unit design, but however, part of it is going to be the leveling aspect of heroes that necessitates everyone to group up around the auras and around like the healing abilities, for instance. So I guess long answer short, we are currently planning to have heroes in our game in some degree, but they will not necessarily scale over time as they do in Warcraft 3 with experience.
Yeah, no levels, no experience. Probably no items, I would imagine. Is that anything you guys have thought about? Of creep
Yes.
camps. So what exactly would creep camps give? It would be resources in your view, or what are you thinking with that?
I think there's a lot of things that creep camps can give. Resources is a big one, for instance. Um, uh, rune drops, for instance. So
Right.
basically, you have runes in Warcraft 3, kind of similar idea there.
Mhm.
Rune drops that drop wards or watchtowers or speed boost or defense boost or whatever kind of boost. But we have a lot of ideas there as well.
Mhm.
So how should I envision a hero that can't level? Because if you can't level, you can't get new skills. So they have a fixed skill set at the moment, of course.
Yeah, so I would we again, everything is somewhat up in the air right now, but we imagine a lot of different ways to improve your heroes over the course of the game with upgrades, for instance. So we still don't want the heroes to be extremely overwhelming, but that is one aspect that we're focusing on.
Sounds like a pretty good middle ground. We talked a little bit about the problems of RTS already, and now we talked a little bit about the gameplay, and it sounds like you have, like you said it, you have to do a lot of multitasking, and it's not necessarily the easiest thing in the world. So how do you want to lower the entry barrier for new players to the RTS genre so they're not overwhelmed by doing 400 APM every single game?
Yeah, we have a lot of ideas there, but to preface that, one of our goals is definitely going to be to lower the skill ceiling, but or the skill floor rather. I get those mixed up all the time. But at the same time, we definitely don't want to lower the skill ceiling as well. We have a great respect for the skill it takes to play Blizzard style RTSs, and we want to maintain that skill. However, we want to we definitely want to make it easier for newer players to engage with RTS. And I would say we're approaching this from a lot of ways. Number one, we're going to have a lot of different modes for players to enter into. Players don't have to go with PvP as the end goal. They can go into a PvE mode, which we saw a lot in StarCraft 2. Number two, onboarding. We're going to have a lot of onboarding tools for each of the different game modes. And specifically, we're going to have strong onboarding tools for you to recruit a friend into our game with. Number three, we're going to have a lot of UX improvements, things that lower the entry to barrier to entry into RTS, but still allow players to still allow higher level players to engage with more complicated skills than a newer player. And number four, with gameplay, we think there's a lot of techniques in RTS that have been refined over time. And I'll just give you some examples. From StarCraft 1, we have the Reaver Drop. The Reaver Drop has a lot of immense skill in it because of the acceleration properties of the shuttle. A newbie level player controlling a Reaver Drop is miles different from a pro player because you actually have to control the speed of the shuttle and use precise not only clicks, but also you have to use the precise movement commands along with the just the total package, movement and controls. And another example I like to give from Warcraft 3 is the idea of autocast, and I'll use slow as the best example. So when a sorceress comes out, it has autocast slow on, and as a newbie player, I can just leave it on the entire time, and it'll just slow everything reasonably well. But as a pro player, I'll want to turn it off when I'm creeping, and if I only have one sorceress, I might want to manually cast slow. And third, slow only autocasts on enemies that are attacking you, so I might want to manually cast it on a retreating enemy. So those are some ideas of where it's an auto-cast ability, lowers the barrier to entry. It allows you to use the sorceress in a reasonably manageable state, but at the same time, it allows for higher skilled players to engage with flow and get like the most out of the ability.
Right. Yeah. This is kind of just a random, maybe dumb question. It keeps coming to my mind when we talk about mechanics and just random gameplay. Is blocking something you guys have thought about, or something that's possible with given the level of pathing that you have? Because I think just blocking and surrounding is such an interesting part of Warcraft, but it's not necessarily. It may be a little bit in Starcraft too. Is that something you guys have thought about, or are going to try to implement in some way?
Yeah, we definitely thought about it. It's I can't guarantee anything for sure, but it's something that is definitely in a document somewhere that of things that
Mhm.
we'd like to try.
Right.
Specifically, one of the things we're thinking about is, this is something we definitely have to first prototype and then implement and see if it works well or not. Is the idea that maybe your units are able to block enemy units, but not your own units.
Right.
We think blocking in Warcraft 3, it's interesting when you're doing it to your opponent, but when you're doing it to yourself or your allies, it can be extremely frustrating. So one of the hidden tricks in StarCraft 2 is actually that your units treat your allies' units differently in terms of pathing than your opponent's units. And there's a lot of tweaks that we can do there.
Very cool. Yeah, I was screaming playing ladder last night when I TP'd to my base and got stuck behind a kind of tower. So yeah, I get what you mean exactly. Yes.
Yeah, another detailed question maybe, because this came up in the wake of Reforged, I think, is that in Warcraft you have limited control groups with 12 units, and in StarCraft, of course, you don't have that. So the big discussion was, should you remove that 12 unit limitation, and should you maybe introduce something like the F2 key for StarCraft that selects all your units and send them somewhere? What's your stance on that? Where's your position in terms of control group limitations and hotkeys that make things easier?
I think those are both unlimited control groups or very high numbers of units in a control group, and the F2 key are both innovations at StarCraft 2 that allow newer players to get into them very much more easily. And those are some of kind of the innovations that we're kind of looking to expand on and to push forth even further in order to allow players to engage with it even more. The F2 key, for instance, in StarCraft is something that even pro players engage with a lot. So it's not necessarily even a key that is just for newbie players. I think in a game like Warcraft 2 with Warcraft 3 with a lower number of units, it's less necessary, as is unlimited control groups. But I think it would still be a nice thing to have. I think in Warcraft 3, relative to Brood War, where like you really, really wanted unlimited control groups in order to control your army, and Zerg was balanced around the idea that you didn't have unlimited control groups. I think in Warcraft 3, it's a lot necessary.
How big do you envision your armies in your game? Because in Warcraft we have like 100 supply food. In StarCraft it's like 200. How big should armies be?
Yeah, I think the supply metric sometimes can be a misleading, because I could have a 500 supply limit and all my units cost like 10 food, right? But I would say overall in our game, we're looking for army sizes that can potentially, on one end, eclipse the number that was set in StarCraft 2, but at the other end, maybe something closer to Warcraft 3. So it's going to depend on the factions, but we're going to try to have a very disparate, varied level of play in terms of what kind of armies you can control.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, and I guess if you want to have high time to kill, or at least higher than StarCraft 2, I suppose if the armies are then also bigger than StarCraft 2, that might pose a problem in fights are extremely long, which I guess is not a bad thing if fights are really long. I know I'm a fan of human mirror, but maybe some people aren't. But I suppose that might serve some complications. But yeah, I definitely think it would be interesting to finally play a game with bigger armies and that also have a little bit of micro ability in that too.
Human mirror, you haven't seen the Night Elf Mountain Giant mirror yet.
I remember Glaive Thrower mirror, but I have not had the pleasure of seeing Mountain Giant mirror. No, Monk.
All right, let's move away from gameplay a little bit. I think we talked this quite extensively now. What's your business model gonna be? Because that is the talk of the town in the gaming industry at the moment, right? Like with Diablo Immortal being super pay to win. How do you want to make money? What's your model?
It's Diablo Immoral, by the way, not Immortal. Thank you. Sorry,
As a
go ahead.
former Blizzard employee, no comment on that. But with our game, we are going to be free to play at launch, and we will. But at the same time, we will feature no pay to win mechanics and no NFTs. So in terms of free to play, you will get an initial chapter of our campaign. You will get access to some heroes, which will be available in competitive multiplayer and our PVE cooperative mode, with the option to purchase more chapters of campaign and more skins and whatnot in the future. We'll be releasing new story chapters, new heroes, and new skins and these cosmetics in seasons. And the reason we're doing this is that we're, as a development team, we have to be able to sustain ongoing development in a way that allows for our game, our team, and our community to thrive for years to come. Even in competitive multiplayer, we think it's very important for the developer to be invested in the game in years to come, and that is what allows us to fuel development in order to support our game, in order to have constant patches, whether it be balance patches, whether it be feature patches. And a lot of this is really inspired from our days back in StarCraft 2. So back in the StarCraft 2 days, we transitioned StarCraft 2 from a box product to a free-to-play games as a service model. We felt like this had a very strong net positive as a result, and we were able to recruit a lot of new players with this transition, and a lot of players actually stuck around a lot. So we're going to be trying a similar approach with our upcoming game, which will include a closed beta that will help us to polish features and set expectations before we launch with a version 1.0. And then after that 1.0, we're going to release with a constant beat of new story and gameplay elements in order to keep players excited for years to come.
Very cool. Yeah, specifically on skins, you probably get asked this question so often, and you probably internally, maybe have had some debates. But for competitive games, I think skins are normally debated upon whether or not they're a good thing. I think especially in RTS games, having a unit look one way and you get used to that unit looking one way, and then it to be changed depending on a new skin pack that comes out or something like this. Maybe is something that people could be against. What is your view on this? And is this something you're actually going to implement, or do I have this wrong here?
Yeah, we're definitely going to have army or unit skins in our
Hmm.
game. And in terms of RTS, we learned a lot of valuable lessons from when we were in StarCraft 2. We
Hmm.
didn't necessarily get skins right all the time, but hopefully we learned those lessons. So, for example, we learned a lot about how the shape language and how colors affect skins.
Right.
So, for instance, we we had stalkers and immortals, and a lot of those skins looked very similar to each other, and sometimes players couldn't tell them apart. So from the baseline, one of our goals is going to be to number one, design the units so that they look more disparate from each other, especially units like the stalker and the immortal. And number two, make sure that the skins reflect the shape language of the original unit.
Right.
Another aspect of it is the importance of color. One of the examples that I come to my mind is the Baneling, and the Baneling is iconic for its kind of green little circle that it's
Hmm.
on its body that houses this explosive group. And what we learned is, like, compared to every other color in the game or other color language in the game, that was super iconic. And if you remove that, if you change that color to like a purple or like an orange, for example, you uh, disallow players from being able to identify the baneling as quickly. Maybe
Right.
they can identify it with like a half-second delay, but that's still that's still pretty impactful in the context of fast-paced RTS.
Hmm.
So I would say overall, we're going to be looking at individual unit skins, and if some of them are, we're going to be looking very carefully to make sure the units read similarly to how they did in how they originally do, but at the same time, we're going to be working with them on an individual basis.
Yeah, I suppose that's a big thing when it comes to skins actually that I never thought of. It's not necessarily the unit looks different from itself, it's that two units already look similar and then you change one, and then you can't differentiate between the two units that look similar before. I think that's a really good point. So yeah, if they all look unique in their own right, changing them a little bit color wise or something maybe isn't going to be that impactful. Right, gotcha.
Yeah, like it's funny because part of the problem comes from the fact that the Stalker and the Dragoon, or the Stalker and the Immortal, are basically Dragoons 2.0.
Right, yeah.
So the problem comes from the idea that it's StarCraft 2, right? So we don't necessarily have those restrictions, so we're more free to go like hog wild in terms of what our units, the shape of our units look like.
All right. You mentioned the campaign quite a bit. You mentioned that they will be released in chapters. I think that's the starting point of all the new players. Of course, there's the competitive players of all the Warcraft and Starcraft guys who will jump straight into ladder. But if you want to get to know the game, I guess you start as a single player in the campaign. Why does Stormgate have a better campaign than what's out there at the moment, where it's oftentimes like build a base, destroy your enemy, there's 1 or 2 objectives? What's special about the Stormgate campaign?
Well, number one, what's special about the Stormgate campaign is that it's going to be led by the lead campaign designer of Warcraft 3. And personally, I would say that Warcraft 3 and Starcraft 2 are like definitely, in my very biased opinion, the 2 best RTS campaigns of all time. But especially Warcraft 3 was the best for its time. Like, I think Starcraft 2 arguably might be better, but Warcraft 3 was a much bigger jump from what existed before. We learned a lot from the days from like the StarCraft 1 days, where your bases were like really far from the minerals, and like every mission was defeat the enemy mission. So we're going to be taking a lot of lessons there from just all the various previous Blizzard RTSs that we worked on. And what's different about our campaign is that number one, we're going to have the ability to play cooperatively with your friends. I mentioned earlier that social RTS is really a large part of what we're going to be about, and that's going to be reflected in all game modes, whether it's campaign, cooperative, competitive, or user-generated content. Another aspect is we're going to be releasing campaign content over the course of our lifetime. So we're going to initially just have some introductory campaigns, and then every season or so, I don't want to commit to a time period, but every so
One
often.
per month.
Oh, 1 per month. Yeah. I'll get back on that one as well, but we're going to release campaigns over time, and we're going to allow players to follow the campaign over time. And from a competitive standpoint, we're going to be releasing these seasons alongside the competitive season, so that there will be a natural starting and stopping point for players if they kind of leave the game and then have a natural time to come back into the game. This is really inspired from actually streamers such as you guys. I think one thing that I've heard is that one of the most important parts of streaming is that you are very consistent. You come on, you come on and you come off at the same time every single day. And we think it's a travesty for if a player churns or leaves our game, that they don't know when the next jumping on point is. So we want to be committed to regular seasons, so that there is content drops of cooperative, of campaign, of competitive, such that players can jump on to such that players know when the next jumping on point. And we're hoping to align that with our esports as well, where where after a season ends, new content will be dropped, and therefore the whole ecosystem is kind of working with itself across all game modes.
Okay, so I'm getting a little giddy about esports already, but I have to ask for a clarification. You can play the main story of your game with a friend. It's not like co-op in StarCraft, where it's like dedicated co-op missions, but you can play the main story of the game with your friend, right?
That's correct. We don't have a set. We don't have anything to announce today in terms of how that will happen, but social RTS gameplay is definitely, I would say, the message to all of this.
That sounds pretty new and innovative to me. So let's talk esports. We're an esports channel here. You mentioned the 4 pillars. How important is esports or competitive among the 4 pillars of Stormgate?
Yeah, we see esports to be um, kind of core to what RTS is. Like coming back from the StarCraft 2 team, right? We believe that StarCraft 2 is really intertwined with streaming and esports in general because it was, I would argue, the first really modern esport and the first esport that brought around the that launched kind of Twitch and streaming in general. So we have a lot of roots there. In addition, um, our biggest investor right now is Kakao Games. I don't know how much you guys are familiar with the little Kakao sound, but that is one of the biggest companies in Korea. So we are very committed to esports. So I would say, yeah, esports is very important, and we have a lot of cool plans surrounding esports. The first most important thing is we plan to have what we call integrated esports, in which players can engage with the esports within the client. So all you have to do is press play, and you're there. This will hopefully lower the barrier to entry, where you don't have to go to like a Battlefy or like some kind of bracket system, and tournament organizers. It'll be easier for tournament organizers such as yourselves to engage with our game. Another aspect is that we plan to reward players for engaging with the esports. So if you play in a tournament, and you either participate or win, it doesn't really it depends on it really doesn't depend too much, but we will give you in-game rewards as well. So there could kind of be a push-pull mechanism there in order to encourage players to engage with esports if they'd like. And also, as I mentioned before, we hope to amplify game moments with esports. The esports tournament timing and the seasons will be aligned with the cycle of content. So hopefully, esports seasons will naturally flow into new chapters of both content and the lifespan of our game itself. And maybe there could be some cool integrations with the winners of a tournament and what happens in the next campaign season. Who knows?
Ooh. Okay, since we're like a burned child here at the Warcraft scene, can you promise me right here, right now, that at launch there's a letter for Stormgate?
I would say that with version 1.0, when we first announce our game or when we first launch our game, there will be a ladder.
Wonderful. I'll hold you to
Yay!
it.
That's all we need. We'll be good. We'll be playing for 20 years with just that alone, Monk. We'll be good to go.
All right, so does this mean that you're also running your own tournaments, similar to like Riot is running Worlds or Valve is doing their circuit?
So first of all, I'm not the esports guy, so I would have to defer to Trevor there. But overall, I would say we want to. We're still working on our plans. However, we want to make sure that our esports are going to be very sustainable, and we hope to work with tournament organizers and the community, such as yourselves, and to ensure that we can have sustainable esports for a long time to come.
Does that include that you're able to watch games in client like a Dota TV, like a Flow TV?
That's not something we can announce today, but it's something that we have been looking into both right now and in our times on the StarCraft 2 team.
While you're watching these games, if that's the thing later on, any features for observers like a rewind function, like a UI? Is that not necessarily a priority, but is that something on your list?
So again, Ryan Shooter, aka Gameheart, the person who kind of really started all this observing stuff in StarCraft 2, is on our team. So that's very dear and important to his heart. And as a baseline, what we're going to aim towards is the replay functionality that was released at the launch of Wings of Liberty. So that does include things such as speed up, slow down, pause, rewind, the whole shebang.
Sounds good. Carson, I cut you off again, I think.
What was I gonna say? Oh yeah, because you mentioned like community driven tournaments and stuff. So you're not looking to take the tyrant approach of a Riot Games where it's like, no, you can only play our tournaments. You can only play in tournaments if they're run by us. So I think you guys are pretty open to community tournaments, community casters, and all that sort of stuff. and casters not getting fired if they say Counter-Strike when they're casting a Valorant match, stuff like that sort of deal. You guys are pretty chill with all that, at least at a sort of a baseline.
Well, you can reference Warcraft all you want.
Okay,
It's a
good.
game that we enjoy on our team, and we would be honored if you would make comparisons to Warcraft 3 while you're casting one of the Stormgate matches.
Beautiful. And community tournaments are gonna be a thing you guys are open with as well, not just necessarily FrostGiant run tournaments.
Yeah, not only do we want to support community tournaments, we want to more integrate them into the path to pro,
For sure.
such that the whole ecosystem, the whole esports ecosystem, is very robust and very cohesive.
Right. Gotcha.
Okay, so we talked campaign. You at StarCraft were pretty much responsible for the co-op. Can you share some insights on the Stormgate co-op?
Yeah, so Stormgate co-op. So what I imagine Stormgate co-op to be, compared to every other mode, is going to be kind of the next iteration of StarCraft 2 co-op. When we released StarCraft 2 co-op, which is a PvE cooperative mode in which you and one ally play in campaign-style objectives in 2015 with Legacy of the Void. Or the team itself was like, maybe players would play it for like 10 hours, and it's a cool thing that players can engage with for just 10 hours, but it became much more popular than we initially thought it would be. Instead of playing for tens of hours, players would play for hundreds or even thousands of hours. And in order to appeal to that player base, we had to kind of like redefine our entire pipeline, and we had to assign a much bigger team than we expected to create this content. So the benefit of this was players got more content. However, because we didn't know which year would be our last year, we always went into the mindset of, we're going to do the next best thing for our players. We're going to make the next best update that we can. And every year we did that. So every subsequent year, this was truly the next best thing. But at the end of things, it was kind of like a Jenga tower where things didn't fall into place very well. But the pieces were not built with each other in mind, and it was not as cohesive as we would like it to be. So with Stormgate, we're kind of thinking it from the ground up. How do we make Stormgate PvE cooperative the best it can be, and build a cohesive system? Some things we're going to try to do. Number one, a greater social experience with with 3 players in co-op. This allows for more interesting cooperation and more, as I like to call it, wombo combos, in which you can support your ally in a more interesting way. We're also going to have more opportunities for cooperation. In StarCraft 2 co-op, we designed with the mentality that players should be able to solo the map if they wanted to. So in our game, maybe they can, but it will be very difficult. However, we want to make bonuses. We want to make team play give you extremely large bonuses, such that you are very, very highly encouraged to play around with your allies. I think that's one thing that Warcraft 3 actually does relatively well. The idea of, I holy light an enemy, my ally, and that feels really good. It means that my ally took resources that he had and essentially gave them to me. He gave me his mana in exchange for my health. And good job, ally. You helped me a lot there, and I think there's a lot of good feelings around that.
Mm-hmm.
And number 3, and perhaps most importantly, we're going to have a very robust progression system that allows you to both increase in power in PvE and also change your skill set. In StarCraft 2, we had very binary choices of, do you want more power with more, for example, with more attack or more health? So for us, we're going to use the idea of, we plan to use the idea of something like items, in which we can swap in and out different abilities. So for example, my mage now does fire damage. No, it does ice damage now, and you can switch it to lightning damage even. So basically, greater opportunities for both progression and customization. So a lot of exciting things happening in co-op as well.
Very cool.
All right, we covered that, and then we have one pillar left, and that is something for our friends from the Hive Workshop. Shout out. User-generated content. Tell me everything about the editor and the next Dota that comes out of Stormgate.
So coming from the StarCraft 2 team, first of all, a lot of people on this team were modders before we became game developers, and so we have a lot of people who are very passionate about that sector of the game. And in terms of improvements, we're gonna have improvements in two ways. Number one, discoverability. We want to use the lobby system or something similar to the lobby system that was introduced in Warcraft 3. Realized there was a lot of discoverability problems in the Starcraft 2 arcade, in that unless you were already like the top dog, it was very difficult for players to find out about your game. So from the player side, discoverability is a big one. And number two, the editor itself. What we plan right now is to combine the power of the StarCraft 2 editor with the approachability of the Warcraft 3 editor. It's going to be, and in terms of approachability, number one, it's going to be launched directly within the game client. So it's going to be much more, that is going to be much more discoverable. And also, our data editor will include the ability to copy and paste individual units, which I know sounds relatively trivial, but it was actually extremely hard in StarCraft 2. I know back when I was working on StarCraft 2, it often took something like half a day to copy and paste some of the more complicated units, and you had to know exactly which fields to copy and exactly which fields to paste. So even though it was powerful, not a pleasant user experience, especially if you're a newbie. We're also going to have a basic and advanced feature modes. So for a newbie user to the editor, you're going to be able to adjust fields such as HP and like attack damage, all those like basic things that a newbie would want to get into. But as an advanced user, you can opt into the advanced editing mode, in which you can adjust things such as like turn speeds or unit like radii, for instance, fields that are more niche, and you might need to read a few things to edit properly, I would say. So a lot of hopefully improvements there.
And with that, will you have sort of, because I know StarCraft 2, if I'm remembering correctly, is how it sort of had, this is probably very far away at this point, sort of had a contest for like map makers for melee maps, and for Warcraft 3, now obviously all of our maps are made by the community members. Do you guys have plans for some sort of integrated system to help people sort of submit maybe melee maps for competitive play, or are you guys thinking that it will be just strictly FrostGiant at this point that are going to make all the standard competitive melee maps?
So I think our journey into competitive map making will be similar to what happened in StarCraft 2, in which initially FrostGiant makes all the maps, and then gradually, as the community becomes more familiar with both the editor and how to make competitive maps in terms of design, we onboard some of those maps on as well.
For sure.
Yeah, even right now, the StarCraft community features 100% community-made maps, so that could be a possible direction that we could go towards.
Very cool.
What we saw in the Chinese client of Warcraft 3, and I think also on platforms like Steam, is that some map makers or user generators can earn money with what they provide for your game, whether it be skins or maps or whatever. Is that something you think about as well?
Yeah, that's definitely something we're thinking about in the future. Where it's something that we would have liked in StarCraft 2, but it's something right now we want to build from the base up. Right now, we don't have any plans to announce, but some ideas we're looking at is the idea of something like patronage, where you are able to subscribe to a map maker, something like curation, which is what happened in StarCraft 2, where we picked individual map makers to feature, and they were able essentially to sell their maps, or a very open-ended marketplace similar to what Roblox has. So this is where we're looking for feedback for. As a community map maker, which one of these would you prefer within Stormgate?
All right, then I think we're coming to an end about the 1 hour mark here. We don't want to steal more of your time. You're a busy man. But let me play devil's advocate / negative Nancy here now. I heard so many good things from your presentation last week and today, and from what you told us here. I think the approach is pretty great. The setting is really good. The way you think about RTS and gameplay and systems and esports and everything, it feels like you're building a utopia for RTS here, but you're still a relatively new and also in comparison small company. So do you maybe do too much at once? Do you want too many things at once and perfect too many things at once? Is that a risk, or can you calm me down and say that everything will be good?
Well, first of all, we come from the Blizzard roots, so we really want to try to create the best experience for all our players. One of our tenets is that we recognize that every segment of RTS, the four pillars I had mentioned before, it's kind of its own individual unique sector. So we want to create content that specifically fulfills the needs of that pillar. At the same time, we're building teams in order to support all those pillars. So one thing that we don't have with respect to Blizzard is we have a core development team here right now, but we don't have a lot of the supporting cast. We don't have like a extremely dedicated marketing department that works across 5 games. We don't have like a large, robust esports department that works across 5 games. So it's really up to, I would say, that's part of why we're doing all this outreach right now. We need the community to kind of spread the word about our game, so that we don't, even though we don't necessarily have the marketing budget, for instance, we are able to get the word out there that that Stormgate is coming, and we will try to be the next big RTS.
Will certainly help you with that. So maybe a couple of quick fire questions that you can answer with yes, no, or whatever. How many factions will there be?
Right now, we've announced 2 factions, but it remains to be seen.
Okay. Will there be more than ground and air units? Like sea, naval, stuff like that?
Right. So we thought about naval units a lot, especially with respect to Warcraft 2, with respect to Red Alert 3, and with respect to Age of Empires. And at least initially, with both our cooperative and competitive modes, we decided against it for 2 primary reasons. The first is that we think that naval units really limit map design, and that you have to necessarily design all your maps with water in mind, or you like kind of limit some part of your tech tree to be, oh, you can't use those units right there. And number 2, we think it creates opportunities for players to kind of put themselves into a trap in order to make quote unquote the wrong decision. For instance, if you build too many submarines, you just can't, and you're overwhelmed with the ground, you just can't deal with the ground units at all. Whereas even if you build, let's say, I don't know if this is the best example, but like gargoyles, right? You can still hit ground units pretty effectively, even though they are theoretically an anti-air unit. Even if you build the hippogriff, which is the only unit that can attack ground units, you can still mount an archer on top of it and get some use out of it if you need to attack ground. So as a newer player, if I invest too much into sea units, maybe I put myself in a rough position if the ground units become, or the ground becomes like the highly contested territory.
Seems very good to me. How do I get a beta key?
All right, this is a great question. I'm glad you asked. You can get it, sign up for our beta, which will come out in 2023 by going to playstormgate.com. Once again, that is playstormgate.com. And by going to this website, you can also subscribe to our newsletter. And finally, if you go to our wish list on Steam, or you can go to search for Stormgate on Steam and you can wish list it. And that actually helps us a lot as part of the Warcraft community. That would also give us a lot of outreach. That would help us in terms of advertising the game.
All right, and I think people heard a lot from you. If they disagree with you and want to give feedback to what you said here today, what's the best way to reach out to the team and send feedback to you guys?
Yeah, so one of the cool things that we've been doing over the past year or so since we've announced is we have a subreddit, Reddit /r FrostGiant, where there's been such like amazing RTS discussion over the past few years. And with the announce of our game, we're going to actually have a new subreddit, r/Stormgate. So please come to our subreddit and give us feedback. We're really listening to. We've actually read pretty much every comment that's ever been in our subreddit, and we will continue to do so for Stormgate. And as always, you feel free to follow us on our social medias and tweet at us or Instagram at us or TikTok at us if you would like. Those will be fun. And we're going to be looking to all the feedback that's out there. Even though I remember initially when we announced our team, there was so much feedback, but eventually we got to all of it.
That's devs that actually listen to a community, guys. Isn't that beautiful? And the people now saw the reveal today. They listened to 1 hour of Monk here today, but they want to hear more. Is there something in the near future where people could find out even more about your game?
Yeah, so I guess today is June 9th, right?
That is correct.
The date, yeah, June 9th. So on June 12th, we're actually going to be revealing more information about our game. I don't know exactly where, so you will edit that down here. There's going to be a link down here to where you can find out more information of our game. Isn't that how YouTube works? Like and subscribe, guys.
Exactly what it is. Or I can just tell you guys, because it's the PC gaming show on June 12th on 12:30 PDT. So you guys can check out that.
Thank you for doing our job,
right?
I'm pretty excited for that, so it's just burned in my head. That is 3:30 p.m. EDT and 8:30 p.m. BST PC gaming show. More of FrostGiant. Is there any other question from you, Carson, before we let Monk go?
I think I'm chilling. I had some Warcraft questions, but I think we'll leave it short, concise. We'll talk about what's important here. And Warcraft isn't important today, Neil. I'll DM Monk.
Well, I have. If you ever want to talk about Warcraft, we can do another one of these. I love talking about Warcraft as well, so feel free.
We'll do a follow-up with this for sure. We're going to follow you across the entire Stormgate journey. Is there anything you want to mention? Is there anything you want to leak to the Back to Warcraft audience about Stormgate? Floor is yours.
Well, I just want to, first of all, I don't know if I can call myself a part of the community, but it's been really great to be part of, Jim and War3 champions and just hang around with everyone over the past few years or so. After I left the StarCraft team, I was still playing StarCraft, but I was looking for to reinvigorate myself with my first love, which was Warcraft3, and everyone in the Warcraft team or in the Warcraft scene really kind of welcomed me into their arms, and I was able to get great coaching to come back into the scene, and I was able to make so many friends along the way. So I would just say a huge shout out to everyone in that scene for providing me with hours and hours of entertainment, especially you, Carson, who sometimes plays twos with me when I'm bored.
Yeah, you beat my ass at least once a week, man. Yeah, you're people forget you're pretty good. People might not know that, but you're pretty good. You're pretty good at Warcraft. You're no slouch. So yeah, GG's. We'll play soon. All
right.
Sounds good, everybody. Monk, thank you so much for your time and for this incredible insight. We will follow you every step along the way and very much looking forward to the beta and everything else in between. Follow the guy on Twitter, follow FrostGiant everywhere, follow us here at this channel, ring the bells everywhere. Hope you enjoyed this. Share your feedback about Stormgate and whatever FrostGiant is doing. Thank you very much for watching, listening, whatever you're doing. See you soon.